Oh my god, I can't believe I just said that on the internet. Hey y'all, my name is Nat. Hope you're having a terrific day today, and for this video we are going to be doing a ARC reading vlog. Alright, before I get into anything bookish, make sure to hit like and subscribe down below, as well as tell me in the comments, are these books on your TBR? Are you intrigued by them? Do you want to read them now? Let's talk about it. Alright, so as per usual with a ARC reading vlog, thank you so much to Netgalley and the publishers for providing me with free copies of these books in exchange for an honest review. I am very excited for both of them. I feel as though both of these work really well together. They're both sort of dark stories, and they're also each retellings. I just realized, oh, that's pretty cool. So first up, I am going to be reading The Death I Gave Him by x.liu, which is a locked door murder mystery with a queer and sci-fi twist on Hamlet. Yeah, that blurb alone had me intrigued. Hamlet is also probably my favorite Shakespeare play. I'm not a big Shakespeare fan when it comes to reading it, but seeing it performed, I like that more, and Hamlet is absolutely the best one. With the sci-fi element of this story, I believe Hamlet and his father are actually scientists, and of course, the Hamlet character ends up finding his father dead one night, and he believes his father's death is somehow tied with the controversial research they've been doing here. So he ends up taking it upon himself to protect said research while also trying to figure out who was responsible for his father's death. Already was intrigued by a locked room murder mystery version of Hamlet, but I think the sci-fi element's just gonna add a little something, some extra panache there that I'm pretty intrigued by. On the opposite side, I'm gonna be reading Rouge by Mona Awad. Now, if you know anything about Mona Awad's books, they're weird. They're unusual. They're a bit horrific, and they're gonna feel like an acid trip. I can't wait. So this one is a Snow White retelling, and I've heard that it has some discussions around like the cult of beauty. I believe we're following a young woman who has always been very obsessed with trying to maintain a young look. And recently her mother has passed away, so when she goes to try and handle her mom's affairs, she ends up being sucked in by the almost cultish spa that her mom was a part of. Sounds weird and unusual. I'm sure it's gonna be another crazy time because it's Mona Awad, but I'm very intrigued to see her writing with this sort of a storyline. I always really enjoy the commentary she has going on in her books, but she does them in such strange ways. This is gonna be a time, and I'm very excited. That is it for now. I will talk to you guys when I have started into one of these books. Hey y'all, so I started into The Death I Gave Him. I would currently estimate I'm maybe like 19% in, and nearly immediately I was dragged into the story because this has a very interesting setup. We have an outside narrator who is unnamed, tells us at the beginning that they have compiled a bunch of evidence to give us the story of what took place the evening of the king, or excuse me, Dr. Litchfield's death. The footnotes as well as the introductions to the chapters highlight where they got this information from and how they have pieced together this bit of evidence to give us the narrative they're telling. But those elements also add to the puzzle that we as the reader are trying to put together of the events in the story. Liu's writing for each character is so well done. They are each very distinct and somehow perfectly match the voice I've created in my head for each of these characters as well. For example, Horatio is actually a AI in the story, and he comes across a little clinical, but at the same time, like, you can tell there is something underlying his code. There's something more to his character. We also see from Hayden, our Hamlet character, and right out of the get-go, he seems like a tortured genius. Then Felicia, we see through her eyes, she is the Ophelia of the story. Her chapter definitely has that like juxtaposition of feeling a loyalty to Hayden because he is her ex-boyfriend, but at the same time, she obviously thinks he is responsible for something that happened this evening. She comes across as really smart, but also sort of nervous, and I'm really intrigued to see more of her character specifically. The writing of each of these characters alone impressed me. On top of that, the plot of the mystery. Doing a locked room murder mystery for Hamlet, I think, is a perfect modernization of the story, but adding this sci-fi element is so interesting, and it just amps things up a notch. It tells you this isn't going to be as cut and dry as you would expect. Hamlet is actually my favorite Shakespearean play I've ever seen performed. Because of that, I obviously know the play quite well, and I'm really intrigued to see what Liu changes in the story, how they twist things to make it still surprising. Because if they were just to follow the original plot of Hamlet, it it would be too predictable. It wouldn't really work as a shocking mystery. The element of missing data that is tied to this really big name project, it ups the stakes, but it also allows for other players to be involved in the crime. Like right out of the get-go, I am really enjoying this. I am so intrigued to see where things go. Hey y'all, so I have hit roughly the 60% mark into the death I gave him. I have to say, I'm really enjoying this. I thought from the get-go Horatio was gonna be my favorite character and perspective. However, I'm actually really coming to enjoy 𝗖cie. She is the Ophelia character, and from the start, I wasn't sure how well characterized she was going to be on her own. Because in the original Hamlet, I feel like she isn't as big of a focus in comparison to, obviously, Hamlet. But I think she's actually grown a lot from what we're originally introduced to, where she kind of comes across this nervous woman who is very smart and unfortunately is stuck in this weird position between her boyfriend, or her ex-boyfriend, and her father. They're not still together. She does know him as a person, and she doesn't want to believe that he's responsible for his father's murder. But at the same time, she's aware that he is also a very smart person. He has had this real struggle with his depression, and she's concerned about what that means for the actions he is taking. And seeing as how everyone in this book is lying to each other, it's a fair concern. There is this fantastic tension between them because, as I said, they dated one another. They want to believe the best of this person, but they also know the other person so well, and they know things to be skeptical about. They want to trust each other, but they're also both very hesitant to do so. And like I said, so many secrets going on, particularly once we meet Charles, our Claudius character, Hamlet's uncle, if you're unaware. He also becomes a far more intriguing character, but there's so many secrets and lies wrapped up in him. Even though we don't get his perspective, I'm really starting to enjoy the scenes he is in because every time he is on the page, another layer is peeled back.
Onions have layers. Ogres have layers. Onions have layers. You get it. We both have layers.
To reveal more of the dastardly charming man that he is. Again, I do really enjoy Horatio as the AI character, but there's clearly something more there. Even though he does come across as very sterile and clinical in his perspective, he also, he's very empathetic, particularly with Hayden. I am so curious on whether or not that is going to be where the queer element of the story is going to come in here. Thus far, nothing particularly queer has taken place, been showcased on page at all. Interested to see if Horatio cares for Hayden in not strictly a platonic sense, which again is just could be super interesting because he's an AI. And of course, I'm probably gonna ship it because in sci-fi stories, I also tend to really enjoy interspecies relationships. Oh my god, I can't believe I just said that on the internet. Horatio wants to help Hayden, but at the same time, he is so limited due to the fact that he doesn't have a body. The reason I decided I should update now is because a not super surprising twist took place, if you know the original story, but it was a little shocking. And while yes, this is a murder mystery, so like you would think that sort of a twist would be what would keep me engaged, but really it's more the characters' reactions to what happened that I'm much more interested in. And that right there is the big thing I want to talk about that I'm really enjoying with this book is the writing. Liu's writing is so phenomenally matched with the genre combination of this book. It rides the line between being very scientific and almost sterile to hauntingly empathetic and emotional. There are continuous callbacks to the original story. Even Rasmussen, a graduate student that works at the laboratory, is very clearly supposed to be an amalgamation of Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. And it's very entertaining to me because Rasmussen really isn't that active of a character in the story, but he always happens to be there at the big scenes, which is exactly what Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are as well to Hamlet. Kind of appreciate the fact that Liu kept that going throughout the story. Not only are there the continuous callbacks, but also Liu has perfectly interwoven so many of the original themes from Hamlet into this story and modernized them, but also made them fit so perfectly with the setting they put this story in. He's on the verge of madness. Like, you are watching him make these decisions, watching him do these things. I don't believe a completely sane person would be doing that. And 𝗖cie even makes a comment that we're all reacting in these ways rather than a normal person who would just call the police at this point. Hayden also is stuck in this awful in-between of life and death. He's alive, but he doesn't really have much of a life apart from his job. He is so incredibly fearful of death now that he has actually dedicated his entire life to trying to cure it. And the more we see of his character, the more we start to understand his depression. The themes in the original story are so perfectly paired with the setting that the author put this in. They work together so well in a way I never would have thought prior to this book. Hayden's family is incredibly influential and wealthy. I mean, they're not royalty, but they may as well be with the amount of power that they have. And yet, that does little to protect them in this situation that is playing out. I definitely think that if you were just reading this as a mystery, it would be a little slower going because it's very character focused, but perhaps the twists would be a little bit more shocking for you if you didn't know Hamlet. I think if you know Hamlet and you're reading this, there's just so many parallels you can draw. And again, it's just so impressive how well Liu has modernized the story. Hey guys, so this is a new angle. This is fun. This is on my kitchen table. Hi, I officially finished out The Death I Gave Him. I actually finished out like the last 40% of this book in a single sitting. I couldn't stop, okay? By the end of this, I really just want to reiterate the fact that Liu was so clever in how they set the story up. Again, this is basically a compilation of some unknown narrator piling together different pieces of evidence to tell us the story of what occurred that night at the lab. It's just so cool how they pieced all of this together, how they sort of rounded all of that evidence out at the very end. The unnamed narrator isn't really that important in the grand scheme of the story, but it's just such an interesting way of telling it. I was correct in my assumption about where the queer element of the story was going to come in. I was not the biggest fan of that. There's a romance in this, and I just didn't feel like it had really been developed enough for me to be invested in that romance. Definitely appreciated the entwined thought processes of Hayden and Horatio. I thought that was very interesting, really unusual, a great way to amp up the sci-fi elements. I felt the infatuation Horatio had for Aiden. At no point, though, did I ever feel Hayden's feelings towards Horatio. That was a weird way to phrase that, but you get what I'm saying. Because of that, any romantic scenes between these two was just really, it was a little uncomfortable. It was a little awkward. That's definitely surprising because, as I mentioned, I usually am all over an AI human romance story, but I wasn't feeling it here. I didn't think it had been developed enough. I wanted more from it. I actually think 𝗖cie ended up becoming one of my favorite characters. She just went through so much development in the story, and even though she doesn't really feel like the main character, because a lot of the time she's not really driving anything, she's just reacting to it. However, by the end of it, she really does become a driving force in the story. She takes the reins in her own life. She really attempts to put herself in a position of power with everything going on, and I really appreciated that. Just like the growth we see from her, from where this night starts to the end of it, fantastic. But could kind of be considered an epilogue at the end, showcases that she's just taken that feeling and run with it. She just was an incredibly complex character, and I feel like Liu really amped up the Ophelia character in this story with 𝗖cie. She was great. I really loved her. Also, like I mentioned in my previous update, there was a surprising thing that took place which wasn't super shocking, but I loved watching the characters' reactions off of that event. A very similar thing happened with a reveal shortly before the climax. Same exact scenario. Oh my god, I was so enthralled by watching Hayden react to this news. That was unexpected. It made the chaos of him in the climax all the better, but at the same time brings back my prior statement again about I just loved Liu's writing. Like literally from the start of this book, Liu's writing is so phenomenal. Just continue. The emotion within the story, it's so strong. It is so good. Because I know the story of Hamlet, I was a little skeptical that the finale would actually be anything surprising, that any twists and turns would shock me. However, I was actually surprised because Liu spends the entire time leading you to believe they're going to follow more closely with Hamlet, and then they do a final twist on you. The emotional internal war we watch Hayden have, phenomenally done. Off of this book, I am definitely going to keep an eye out for more of x.liu's work. This was just so freaking good. Because of the romance element, I couldn't in good faith give this 5 stars, but I did give it a very high 4 stars. It was still a great story. I highly recommend this. Whether you know Hamlet or not, I definitely think you could still enjoy this story if you're a mystery fan. But if you know and enjoy Hamlet, I definitely think you should read this just because Liu does so many clever spins to modernize it, and I'm still in awe. It was so good. Hello, beautiful people. Can you tell I am in a bit of a fall mood? Well, it's also, you know, 100 degrees out, so I'm still wearing summery clothes. Anyway, hey guys, I'm gonna estimate like 20% into Rouge already. I'm really enjoying this. This definitely is very reminiscent to Mona Awad's other books so far. Everything's feeling pretty normal, but there's this underlying tension that something's not quite right. So we're following our main character, Mirabelle. Mirabelle has just recently found out that her mother has passed away, and she's told it was a tragic accident that she fell into the ocean. Mira had been living in Montreal while her mother was in California, so she ends up traveling there to try and take care of everything regarding her mother's death. Right from the get-go, you can tell this main character is obsessed with beauty, obsessed with looking youthful. She comfort watches YouTube videos of a woman talking about different skincare regimens, and as we see through occasional flashbacks with her mother, her mom was much the same. Thus far, I really applaud how well Awad has managed to weave in the beauty and style element to the story. Mirabelle's mother owned a dress shop, and then she herself worked at a dress shop in Montreal. Other characters bring attention to the fact that Mira and her mother both looked so much younger than they actually were. Mira is obsessed with skincare products to the point that she thinks about her routine in order to calm herself. When she meets somebody, she kind of picks out like what products could they benefit from using, what does it look like their skin needs. She's described as having a scar on her forehead that she has spent so much time, so much money, has tried so many different products and treatments to try and get rid of it. And now anytime she's feeling vulnerable, that scar gets brought up and she is so aware of it and that people can see it still. It is the tiniest little flaw, but to her it's just like a big billboard on her forehead. We see how Mira longs to be complimented by other characters. There's talk of self-love, but often so far it's always mentioned by the cosmetic companies who are the ones directly benefiting from people practicing said self-love, which is something as a marketing person I find very interesting that I would love to dive into more. Another thing I thought was interesting in discussing beauty was when we see some flashbacks of Mirabelle, it's commented that she is actually mixed. Her mother is French and her father was Middle Eastern. She has darker hair, she has thicker hair, her skin tone is darker, and when she's a child she is so self-conscious about it. And that's another thing I think is really interesting because you could bring up discussions of colorism and the ties that has to the beauty industry. Already I'm loving all of these little bits that are tying into the underlying theme. It's fantastic. I'm so here for it. As far as personality goes, Mirabelle definitely reminds me of the heroes in the 2 prior Mona Awad books I've read. She's pretty jaded, she's cold, she's very lonely, but in this one, the biggest feeling we're seeing from her is grief because her mother has just passed, and really that was the only person she had in her life. And she's really struggling with those feelings because she loved her mother, but at the same time, she keeps coming up with different things that showcase her mother in not such a positive light. That's about all that's happened so far. Like I said, I'm just eating up all these themes around beauty. This is one of the situations where it's like, I got an arc and I'm so happy for that because I get to read this early. But on the other hand, damn it, I wish I had a physical copy so I could be annotating this. There's so much. Mona Awad is so clever in how she just weaves in her themes throughout the story. Love it. Love it. I am all over it. Hey y'all, so I am just shy of the halfway point into Rouge, and I can say I am greatly enjoying this. I do wish I had a physical copy so I could be annotating the crap out of it because, oh my lord, I'm enjoying it. I talked about in my last update that I thought it was very interesting how we were seeing that Mirabelle was following in her mother's footsteps with constantly wanting to be youthful, to always be perceived as beautiful, being very obsessed with her skin routine, her style, all that sort of stuff. We've had a lot more exploration into their relationship. We've seen more in the flashbacks how these little comments and these throwaway actions that Mirabelle's mother, Noelle, would do have really impacted Mirabelle, and how they've imprinted on her so that she is constantly desperate to be seen as beautiful. She has tied her entire value as a person to what people perceive her as, how they view her. It is heartbreaking and hauntingly familiar, I'm sure, for any person who has ever struggled with their self-esteem. It's great, it hits very close to home, and I think Awad has done a fantastic job of showcasing that in the flashbacks, but then also reinforcing it with the current timeline. This is separated into parts. I have just hit part 3, but when we hit part 2, things do kind of start amping up in regard to the cultish element I was told about. There's this lost feeling in Mirabelle's perspective where it almost seems like she isn't really a willing participant in what's happening. And it's interesting because, again, she's talking about it in a way where she's not wanting to do this, but she keeps returning. She keeps saying yes to everything they offer her. She is desperate for the promises that this exclusive spa has given. On one hand, she is very confused by La Maison de Méduse. She's confused by it, but she's also fascinated, completely overwhelmed by the opulence, the superficiality of everything. They have this constant aesthetic going on anytime she is there. And with the cult aspect, it's very interesting because on one hand, yes, Mirabelle absolutely does fit the stereotype of a person who a cult would seek out. But the beauty element of the story sort of shifts the perspective of it. On top of that, it's very interesting because every time she's there, the members keep leading her on by hinting at her mother's involvement. They're sort of continuing to lure her in with that, even though really the selling point for Mirabelle is really the beauty that they promise. The way I would describe the writing in this is the exact same way I described it for Bunny and for All's Well. It is surreal. It is unsettling. It is dreamlike. It's constantly referring to the distorted way we tend to view beauty and ourselves, but also like the disorientation of grief. The atmosphere and the narrative, the story itself so far is just, it's also beautifully cinematic. And because of that, anytime I'm picking this book up, I'm devouring it. I'm working through it quite quickly. I do feel lost on one hand, very similar to Awad's previous books, but I also, for now, I feel like I have a better understanding of what's taking place than I did the other two. But we're only to like roughly the halfway point, so it is a strong possibility that that's gonna change. Hey y'all, so it is super late. I'm a little tired, but you know, I had to finish this book so I could film this update, so I could get this video edited and get it out for y'all on Monday. Hi, I officially finished out Rouge by Mona Awad, and oh my gosh, I loved it. She does it again. Mona Awad manages to combine a super weird, can't get your feet on the ground horror story with a scathing critique of society, and I love it. I love that about her work. Oh my god, I want to get my hands on these books physically so I can annotate them. I believe I talked about in my last update that I was really enjoying the maternal themes that were being talked about in this, because we were seeing how the little things Noelle, Mirabelle's mother, did impacted her throughout her childhood, which then has caused her to live her life the way she does currently. I really adored how that particular theme was wrapped up at the end of this book. It is so wonderfully and terribly relatable. I loved the shift in perspective there. It was so good. It was so good. Especially if you see who the book is dedicated to, and then reading the acknowledgements at the end from Mona Awad, it just like makes it hit even harder. Okay, as far as the cult elements go in this, I also was all over them. I thought Awad did a phenomenal job in creating perfect mirrors between like a stereotypical cult and the beauty industry. For example, like the irony in both always encouraging individuality, but at the same time, we're gonna sell you all of these products that help you to look like everybody else. And you know, we fall for it. We fall for the marketing tactics because everybody has their own ideal idea of beauty, and a lot of people do what they can to try and reach that. But at the same time, that involves, you know, completely removing any sense of identity, any individuality, much like cults do. The beauty industry and capitalism feeds on people's insecurities, and that's how they are able to continuously push these products and find new ones. But all of it is just, again, reinforcing that beauty standard. The parallels, the mirroring she did with the cult. So good. This was sold to me, and I think it's actually in the blurb, that it's like Snow White meets Eyes Wide Shut. Yes, I would say the easiest fairy tale to equate this with is Snow White, but actually there are references to multiple different fairy tales going on in the story. There's like some bits of Beauty and the Beast. There was a reference to Little Mermaid in there. I would even argue like there's kind of a Hansel and Gretel thing that happens at one point. And then also the blurb mentioned Eyes Wide Shut, which honestly, yeah, like I totally can see where they were coming from with that, but I would also say there were certain elements of the story that really made me think of Eternal Sunshine of a Spotless Mind, and I really enjoyed that movie, so I was all over that as well. I did not expect what happened with that element to go where it did. I was so impressed with this book. My CAW pile came down to 4.5 stars. In all honesty, I might just go ahead and give this 5 stars because I loved the conversations happening in this. I think if I could have annotated it as I was reading it, I would have loved it even more, but I also probably would have taken a lot longer to work through this. I really enjoyed both of these books. Highly recommend you check out both of them once they come out. If I remember correctly, they both come out tomorrow. So please check these books out. So freaking good. All right, y'all, so that is it for today. Thank you so much for coming to my channel. I really appreciate it. Make sure to hit like and subscribe down below. I have all my socials as well as a few ways you can support me linked in the description. I come out videos on Monday and Friday, but until then, I hope you continue to have a terrific day. Love you, bye!